You accepted things no one else had. The withdrawals, the long silences, the way they needed space right when closeness felt real. The version of them that most people never saw. Unguarded, unfinished, complicated. You held all of it. Without conditions. Without an ultimatum attached to every moment of difficulty. And when you were finally gone, something happened to them that they were never prepared for. They didn't just lose a relationship. They lost the only mirror that had ever reflected them as acceptable. Why does the avoidant who seems so certain about needing space suddenly lose their sense of self when the person who gave it unconditionally disappears? Why does the identity that was built on self-sufficiency collapse at the precise moment true self-sufficiency is required? What happens inside someone whose entire self-concept was quietly, invisibly held in place by the acceptance of the one person they pushed away? Most people think the avoidance loss is about love. It is. But it's about something more specific than love. Something that lives underneath it. Something most people never name. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what you were providing that no one else had, why its absence produces something the avoidant has no tools to manage, and what the identity collapse reveals about both of you, and about the person you're becoming now that you're building your life on different ground. Subscribe now, and stay until the very last word. That's where this one lands. Here is the misunderstanding at the center of this dynamic. Most people believe the avoidant's primary emotional need is autonomy, that their core desire is freedom from closeness, independence maintained, emotional, self-sufficiency preserved. That is what the pattern presents. It is not what the pattern is protecting. Here is the actual mechanism, and it goes deeper than most content in this space has ever gone. The avoidant's deepest fear is not closeness. It is conditional acceptance. Their attachment system was formed in an environment where being fully known, being seen, in all their complexity, their need, their contradiction, produced withdrawal of love, disappointment, or the emotional collapse of the person being depended on. The child adapted by learning to show less, to need less, to be the version of themselves that required the least from others and therefore offered the least exposure to rejection. That adaptation became the identity. Not the self, the managed presentation of the self. Curated, controlled, designed to be acceptable precisely because it asks so little of anyone. And into that managed presentation, into that careful, defended architecture, you walked. And you didn't require the curation. You saw the withdrawal and stayed. You saw the contradiction and didn't leave. You saw the unfinished, unpolished, defended interior of someone who had spent their entire life making themselves acceptable by making themselves small. And you accepted what you found there. You didn't demand they be different to deserve your presence. And that experience, being accepted without the performance, is not something the avoidance system had ever fully processed, because it had never fully arrived before. You were not just a person they loved. You were the first real evidence that their actual self, not the managed version, the actual self, was something that could be held without being dropped. When you left, they didn't just lose you. They lost the only proof that had ever existed. There are 5 phases that describe how the identity collapse unfolds, and why each one is more disorienting than the avoidance system was ever designed to handle. The first is the hidden dependence phase. Throughout the relationship, the avoidant was drawing on something they were not conscious of. Drawing on your acceptance, consistent, unconditional, present even through the withdrawals, was functioning as a stabilizing force in their identity, not in a way they recognized, in the way that foundations are not noticed until they're gone. Externally, the avoidant presented as independent, self-sufficient, needing very little from the relationship to feel okay. Internally, your acceptance was doing something the avoidant's own internal architecture could not do. It was confirming, repeatedly, that the self underneath the managed presentation was not a liability. Every time you stayed after a withdrawal, you confirmed it. Every time you didn't require them to be different to deserve warmth, you confirmed it. Every time you held the difficult version of them without flinching, you confirmed it. The avoidant was building a covert identity structure on the foundation of your acceptance. Silently, without knowing, and without ever having to do the internal work of building that foundation themselves because you were providing it externally. This is the hidden dependence the pattern never allowed them to acknowledge. The second phase is the exposure shock phase. When you leave, genuinely finally, the hidden dependence is suddenly exposed. Not as a thought the avoidant can name, as an experience they cannot locate the source of. Externally, the avoidant continues to function, to present the composed, self-sufficient surface their identity has always worn. Internally, something has gone quiet that was always providing low-level signal. A kind of relational background hum, the ambient awareness that someone knew them fully and had not left has stopped. And in the stopping, the silence is not peaceful. It is revelatory. The avoidant begins to encounter, in small and then increasingly significant ways, how much of their sense of self had been quietly confirmed by your sustained presence. Decisions that used to feel clear, feel less grounded. The self-concept that always presented as solid is producing a flatness they can't explain. The exposure shock is the first moment the avoidant registers that the identity they believed was entirely self-generated was not. The third phase is the self-concept instability phase. This is where the identity collapse becomes structurally real. The avoidance self-concept, built on the belief that they were someone who needed nothing, depended on no one, and could function fully in independence, is now being contradicted by direct lived experience. Because the evidence is in. They did need something. They were depending on something. And its absence has produced a destabilization their system does not have a template for. Externally, behavioral changes may surface. The avoidant may become quieter, more withdrawn than usual. Not the managed withdrawal of the pattern, but a genuine absence of the usual energy. Or the opposite, a sudden excess of social activity, a rush to fill the space with external stimulation. Internally, the questions arriving are not comfortable and are not being welcomed. Who am I when I'm not being accepted by someone who saw all of me? What is the self-sufficient identity worth when the one condition that actually stabilized it was someone else's presence? Do I actually know who I am without the confirmation I was quietly depending on? These questions are not asked clearly. They are felt as a formless unease, a looseness in the foundations that the avoidant has no map for navigating. The fourth phase is the comparison-confrontation phase. The avoidant begins to experience their other relationships, friendships, family, new connections, through the lens of what is now absent. And what they discover is what you always knew but couldn't fully articulate. The acceptance you offered was rare, genuinely rare. Not because no one else is capable of it, but because the specific quality of being fully known and fully accepted, including the defended, difficult, contradictory parts, is not something that assembles easily or quickly. In their other relationships, the avoidant performs, manages, presents the curated version, and the absence of someone who required none of that curation, who simply received what was actually there, is suddenly legible in a way it never was while you were present. The comparison is not flattering to the alternatives. Not because the alternatives are lesser people, because they are newer, which means the avoidant is still in the performance stage, showing the managed self, which means the acceptance available from them is acceptance of the managed self, which is not the same thing, not even close. The fifth phase is the identity restructuring threshold. This is the phase the collapse has been moving toward, and it is the one that determines everything about what happens next in the avoidant's life. At this threshold, the avoidant has two options. The first is reconstruction of the old architecture. Repair the self-sufficient identity. Close the exposure. Find a new external source of confirmation and rebuild the managed presentation around it without addressing what was underneath. Many avoidants choose this, not consciously. The system finds its equilibrium and restores the E pattern. The second option, the rare one, the one that requires genuine work, is to use the collapse as the foundation for something real. To begin, for the first time, the internal construction of a self-worth that does not depend on external confirmation. To do the work that was always being bypassed by your presence. This is where therapy, real reflection, genuine willingness to face what the pattern has been protecting, all of that becomes either possible or not. The identity collapse is the opening. What happens inside that opening is entirely theirs to Choose. Right here, in the middle of this. I want to stop and ask you something directly. Did you know, while you were in it, that you were accepting things most people wouldn't? Did you feel that what you were offering was rare and wonder if it was being recognized? Tell me in the comments. Not as venting and as honest reflection, because the people who watch this video after you need to know they're not alone in what they gave and what it cost. Your words carry weight here. Most people, when they understand the identity collapse, feel the pull to return. The logic is understandable. You were the one whose acceptance was stabilizing them. Without it, they're collapsing. And being the source of stability for someone you love feels, in the moment, like the right thing to do. This is the most important place in this video to think clearly. Your acceptance was real. It was generous. It was the specific kind of acceptance most people never receive in their lifetime. And it was sustaining someone else's identity in a way that was replacing the internal work they needed to do for themselves. You were not just a partner. You were, without knowing it, an external regulation system for a self-concept that had never been built on solid internal ground. Going back, offering that acceptance again before the avoidant has done the structural work of building internal worth, restores the substitute without addressing the deficit. The most honest act of care you can offer them is staying gone long enough for the collapse to be fully felt, not as punishment. Because felt collapse is the only condition under which genuine rebuilding becomes necessary. And the most important act of care you can offer yourself is recognizing that your acceptance was an extraordinary gift, and that the next person who receives it will be someone who has built enough internal stability to meet it as a gift rather than as a substitute for the work they haven't done. 5 principles govern how you carry this understanding forward without being pulled back into the dynamic by it. The first is called gift recognition without gift withdrawal guilt. What you gave was genuinely extraordinary. Recognizing that is not arrogance. It is accuracy. Gift recognition without gift withdrawal. Guilt means you allow yourself to name clearly what you offered, the depth, the patience, the unconditional quality of your acceptance, without feeling guilty that you withdrew it. A gift that was being used as a structural replacement for someone else's internal work is not sustainable to keep giving. Recognizing that is not cruelty. It is honesty. The second principle is called acceptance recalibration. You gave unconditional acceptance inside a dynamic that was not reciprocating at the same level. Acceptance recalibration is the practice of asking, honestly, without defensiveness, what you received in return for what you offered. Not to perform resentment, to understand where the exchange was unequal and what you require in the next significant connection to maintain your own equilibrium. Unconditional acceptance offered into a dynamic that does not meet it halfway is not love fully expressed. It is love with one party carrying the full weight. The third is called your own identity audit. You gave so much of yourself to sustaining this dynamic that it is worth asking, which parts of your own identity were quiet while you were doing it? What directness did you soften? What standards did you adjust? What expressions of your own full self were modulated to accommodate the avoidance managed presentation? Your own identity audit is the honest examination of who you were inside the dynamic and who you are becoming outside of it, and the specific practices of reclaiming the parts that went quiet. The fourth principle is called worth building from the inside. One of the lessons this dynamic has to offer, if you let it offer it, is about the difference between acceptance confirmed by someone else and worth built internally. You may have been doing some version of the avoidance pattern yourself, drawing your sense of being someone capable of great love from the feedback of this specific dynamic. Worth building from the inside means you identify what you value about yourself independently of any relationships, confirmation of it, and you build toward that specifically every day. The fifth is called rarity acknowledgement without rarity weaponization. What you offered was rare. That is true, and it is worth holding that truth, not as something to wave at the avoidance loss, but as the accurate self-knowledge that you bring something exceptional to a relationship. Rarity acknowledgement without weaponization means you carry that knowledge as a standard for what you deserve in return, not as a grievance about what you didn't receive, but as the clear forward-facing understanding of what you are looking for. Now, Here is the truth this video has been building toward since the first line. You accepted all of them. The parts they couldn't show anyone else. The defended interior. The contradiction between who they tried to be and who they actually were when the performance dropped. You held it without conditions. And that holding, that extraordinary, specific, entirely genuine holding, is not what the avoidant lost when they lost you. It is what they learned about themselves that they can never fully unlearn. That somewhere in them, there exists a self that is capable of being accepted without curation. That the defended interior they spent their entire life hiding is not something that disqualifies them from being loved. They know that now because of you. Whether they do anything with that knowledge is their work to do. Your work is different. Your work is to take what you know you're capable of offering, that rare, specific, genuine acceptance, and to offer it next to someone who has done enough of their own internal work to receive it as the gift it is, not as a substitute, as a connection between two people who have both built enough internal ground to stand on it without needing the other person to hold them up. You don't settle for someone who needs your acceptance to feel worth accepting. You find someone who already knows they're worth accepting and who sees the same in you. Zoom out to the widest view. Every relationship that produces an identity collapse reveals something the relational psychology literature has documented clearly. External sources of self-worth are always fragile. They depend on the continued presence of whatever is providing the confirmation. And when that presence ends, for any reason, the self-worth built on it ends with it. Self-worth that is real, that holds under pressure, that does not collapse when someone leaves, that is always internally constructed, always self-authored, always the result of inner work, rather than outer confirmation. The avoidance identity collapse is the universe delivering, with unambiguous clarity, the lesson that their pattern has been deferring for their entire adult life. Emotional intelligence is not the ability to sustain someone else's identity through your acceptance. It is the ability to recognize when you are doing it, and to understand that genuine love does not carry someone else's self-concept in place of their own growth. Personal power is not the capacity to be accepted by someone incapable of building their own acceptance. It is the groundedness of someone who has built their own sense of worth so solidly that what they offer in a relationship comes from abundance rather than from the need to be needed. You were the person who accepted all of them. Now accept this. You deserve someone who is already whole enough to meet you there. If this video touched something you've been carrying, if it named what you gave and what it cost, leave a comment. Tell me what you brought to that dynamic. What you see now that you couldn't see while you were in it. Your reflection matters here, and it helps someone else understand their own. And if you want to go deeper into what the avoidant does next, whether the identity collapse becomes the beginning of real growth, what genuine change looks like when it finally arrives, and how to recognize it without being fooled by pattern behavior that looks like change, the next video is already waiting. Go watch it now.